I thought when I bought my house I'd have a nice food forest in the backyard, and learned that the lead levels were so high it made no sense to grow. So many of us live in Worcester, some of you live in other communities that with very old housing stock and lead paint that has leached into the soil. So what are the options for us? It's, you know, how, other than covering the land and doing raised beds, you know, what does it mean to, you know, I know what I'm gonna do, but I'm just curious to find out what this means for people here.
Yeah, it's a huge problem here, I know, but did you know when we started the Youth Grow Farm on Oriad Street, we did phytoremediation for just 2 seasons, 2 years.
And that was enough?
That was enough. It brought it to...
Because phytoremediation takes a long, sorry.
Phytoremediation is using plants that suck the heavy metals out of the soils.
Well, there's a third of that lot that's completely not okay for growing food. Because there were 3 house lots, and 2 of them were able to be transformed into gardens, but the third they don't grow food on it because it was a house that was demolished in place, and all the lead just goes right into the soil.
And Toxic Soil Busters, I think, is not even trying to use phytoremediation very much anymore because it takes a long time. And if your lead levels are really high, it's like 10 years.
Right. Probably if they're too high, it's probably just too long.
Is that a response to,
Yeah, I just want to know, so what is the resource? I mean, like, what do you do when all these leads in there? I don't know anything about this, and I find this very fascinating. And like, I could see myself doing something like this in the future for, not just for the community, but also self. So what do you do when all these high levels, I understand it takes 10 years, but what do you do for something immediate?
Well, what the Urban Garden Project has done, we have about 62 community gardens around the city, is that, you know, that there's, you can, let's just look out the door here and you can see them collecting yard waste. So all the yard waste in Worcester gets composted. So for community gardens, the city has delivered that compost, and so the Urban Gardens Project has built contained raised bed areas so that you can garden with this urban compost that's coming from all of our leaves and trees and everything, and turned into really nice, really good stuff that grows a lot of stuff, and put into something that doesn't interact with what's below it. So that is it's a temporary solution that has worked for a whole lot of the community gardens around the city. That compost stuff is available to any Worcester resident, so you don't have to be in a community garden. It's just if you're in a community garden, they'll deliver it to you.
Okay.
And
it
so
makes me think, just a sec, it was mentioned in the plenary session about one of the great tasks that this kind of emerging organization, I bet there's stuff going on where everybody here, there's cool stuff going on you don't even know about. And one of I think the greatest services that could be made is for Worcester or wherever, in Eugene too, what are the kinds of assets, what are the kinds of tools that are out there that can be helpful in doing this, like for you, because you want to sort of, how do I get into doing this? Wow, there needs to be this kind of info. Should be a part of the city's resource page, on their website or something. So it's good to exchange that kind of info.
As far as the elements in the earth, I know nothing about, but your presentation was very good. It was very informative. As a kid, my father always had a garden, but I never ever thought to actually put a garden in the front of your home. And you're absolutely right. It's good for a conversation piece. Number 2, as far as the economy, it's helping, to feed families. I think it's very good for a community to come together and collaborate in sanction in feeding and stopping hunger, the flow of hungriness, because there's so many people that's going without food, and the economy right now is off the chain because people don't have jobs. So this brings out another aspect, as you can grow your own food and you still can survive, you know. So I just want to say thanks to the conference for opening my eyes to a whole another level of how the economy can flow in a good and healthy way.
Yeah, well, a little bit of a caveat. You can grow a surprising amount of food in a small place, but if you're like me, I'm vegetarian, but I'm still, there's no fantasy about producing all the food I need on my plate. I like tempeh, I like tofu, I like peanut butter, but you know, those are the types of things there needs to be these relationships made with more production scale, you know, still local scale, but like the grain and bean project. So these types of relationships need to be in the neighborhood and community, but also outside of town, you know, where you have maybe farmers locally who can be a part of this too. So it's not just a suburban or an urban arrangement we need. This needs to take in rural areas too. Yeah, good.
Koki, did you have something to say? Oh, I thought you had raised your hand. There were other people over there.
Yeah, I just had a question for someone I'm just coming to the area. A lot of this seems like it's really contingent on having a supported city situation, and I know that's not the case everywhere. There's the example in Texas where police invaded and were like
You're from
holding.
Texas?
I'm not from Texas, but I heard of a recent example where there was a community farm, extremely repressive conditions and so forth, just for code violations. It seems very strategic to put certain sectors of the population down and limit opportunities. But I was wondering, which needs to have a different type of organization around it, obviously, about anti-repression work and police state things and other things. But I was wondering if some of the people here could talk to how the Worcester city government is organized, how cooperative things are, if who is good to talk to, where limits are, where walls are.
I can say one thing, and maybe, I don't know, Marco, you might want to say something else. I think that REC has been influential here with the number of our community gardens. So our city government can be accountable when the community comes together and populates city council meetings and organizes and puts pressure on them. But something else I picked up is that if the community produces examples, powerful examples of doing things differently, then that becomes leverage for policy change. And so I think that's certainly my focus, is trying to produce examples. And I'll say what I'm doing in my yard, because you can't do a food forest in a raised bed. So I have a few raised beds, but that is not what I wanted to do with my yard. So I am actually digging it out and using the great resource we have here in Worcester, a free compost, and plan to do permaculture, doing a blitz next year. And I can do that because I know people who can help me out, because it's a very expensive kind of thing to do. But if there are enough people who are interested, and we can organize around digging out the dirt, getting it to us to sand and gravel, and bringing in some more dirt. You need a dump truck, you need a bobcat, you need people who can drive those things. But we can do that if there are enough people who are passionate about it and want to make it happen.
You could do some work parties as well, you know, have people come over and learn about that too.
That's
or
exactly
it could be
right.
even turned into a course where that's the actual application after people learn these principles and what would be good food forest sort of plants in this area.
So a perma blitz I've been a member of an all-volunteer building weatherization team called the Worcester Energy Barn Raisers, and we go around and identify buildings that need to be weatherized. We divide up into teams. People lead those teams, so we organize the community, they come together, they learn particular weatherization tasks, and in the afternoon you weatherize a building. A perma-blitz is the same thing, but with permaculture. So you do a perma-blitz, and in an afternoon you can make great progress in doing the kinds of tasks that permaculture requires. Building up swales around the contours of your land so that you distribute water, putting in the rain barrels, and drip systems so that you don't have to go out and water, but you make use of the water that's available to you. You live within your water budget. Learning about the plants, as Jan said, making use of plants to create spaces in your yard that are maybe more private. Learning how plants work together to so that you don't have to bring in external fertilizers and pest control, but get the plants and the insects to do that for you.
So there ought to be, I think, a big couple pieces of paper put up on a wall here somewhere where these types of local and regional organizations, you know, just a little bit in a paragraph, you know, about what they do as sort of like an index of what kind of assets, you know, and good things are going on here, so people can see that, because I bet there are people who live in Worcester who've never even heard of that. So are you one of the organizers?
Yes, I've been a member of SAGE.
Yeah, well, I suggest we try to get a bunch of paper on the wall, you know, that's sort of like the collective notes of all these workshops, you know, and sort of follow up.
We're trying to do that with the map that's in the front, but there are many different ways to do that, and we will have opportunities throughout the conference to come together and share resources.
Yeah.
But if you have any ideas for how to make that happen better,
Well,
that's
big
great.
butcher paper, you know, on a wall is one way to do that. Websites, contact.
We got a couple comments up here.
Yeah. I hear an awful lot, I'm really new to this, so please pardon my ignorance, but I hear an awful lot of local initiatives, even a little bit about regional, but I wonder how anti-hunger programs sponsored by the government can play a part in helping access the media and the exposure. My daughter's working for AmeriCorps in the anti-hunger program right now, which kind of brought me into, I want to find out more, but I haven't heard any resources being accessed for the larger community, and I wondered if I was just missing that.
So one thing that we've been able to do locally, again through the Regional Environmental Council, through the farmers markets, is to be able to get double credit on WIC. So folks who are eligible for the government food assistance are able to get twice the value of what their food stamp dollars would buy in a supermarket when they're spending that money at the farmers markets. And the farmers markets are, there's a mobile farmers market that goes from housing project to housing project, to neighborhood, and then there's a couple of, and then there's a couple of markets that are more permanently in specific locations. Back to your question, I mean, I think also just in terms of, there's a lot of room for improvement in the way the city responds to a lot of these issues, but there are some places where things are good. I was initially very reluctant to take city compost because I know it includes like leaf sweepings off the streets, and I'm figuring it's got everybody's car oil and transmission fluid and stuff in it, but this stuff's been tested and it's like really high. I mean, I knew it was high quality in terms of how productive that soil turns out to be, but it's also healthy. It's not dangerous, you know, even though it's getting everybody's, you know, people bringing their yard waste and then, well, somebody's been using their ChemLawn system on their grass clippings, but they've tested the stuff, REC's tested the stuff, and it's really quite good and quite healthy. And the stuff that the city has done working with the Regional Environmental Council around the community gardens, I mean, including providing, you know, access to vacant lots, water hookups for those vacant lots, like that the city is providing in order to help make this stuff work. And anyone, even if you're not part of a community garden, if you're a City of Worcester resident, can go to the city's compost station out off Millbury Street, Ballard Street, and you can just load up as many times as you want, on as much compost as you want. They produce, a huge amount of it, so it's very, very fertile stuff.
Yeah, my name's Malcolm. We're from Springfield, and there's some really cool youth gardening going on in Springfield. I guess one of the questions I have is I'm having a hard time seeing how it applies to tenants. I'm hearing a lot of kind of like, I own my property, I'm spending money to turn my property, even if it's like getting other people to help out. So, particularly in cities where tenancy rates are going from 45% to 70%, and home ownership is not realistic, it's not accessible. How can that play out? And then also, what's the real cost? Like, what does it take to actually turn properties into these types of spaces? And I know that there are some organizations that are doing mostly, like, I've seen mostly raised beds, but kind of what are the real costs for in thinking about how this applies in the cities and the neighborhoods that I'm from and we work in.
Well, that makes me think, and somebody tell me if there's a local example of that, but if there were a number of people who rent at the same place, to go to the owners and say, oh, we'd like to have some space, on the property, if there is some on the property, but perhaps going to the municipality and saying we don't really have any place to grow food, what can we do to access city property? But something of
So I think that
That's why we have 62 community gardens.
the community gardens is one answer, but also I know that absentee landlords is a big issue in the city. Landlords that maybe don't even live there. It's an issue with getting buildings weatherized as well as with finding places to plant. But permaculture can be applied to a porch. There are things that you can grow inside the house. You just need a small space, a container to do permaculture. There's also organizing with people to buy a house together.
Wow.
So that's we have.
Yeah, so, for example, housing collectives can work in a lot of different ways, but to the example of our house, someone did have enough of a good credit score and something to get money to put the down payment on the house, which in Worcester, real estate isn't very expensive. It was about $13,000, and what was happening, we have 9 people living in our house from 9 years old to early 60s, and basically we're just paying back the rent. We're paying through our rents, paying back the mortgage and paying back the down payment at the same time, and using that money, capping that money, using it also for investments that need to be done in the house and for buying collective food. We cook together and things like this. So it's another obviously way to build community and think about how you organize family and how you use resources. You obviously use less resources when you only have one fridge and so forth. It's maybe not the all-encompassing model, but it's things that one element that people can think about as well.
I also live in a housing collective in this city, similar to Michelle's home, but we do not own our property. We are tenants, and I've been a tenant in this collective we're going into our 4th year now. We've lived in several different locations, and we have, at our current house, we have a large front yard that is most likely, we haven't had it tested, but we've just assumed based on the age of our house and so forth that it is lead contaminated. We built raised beds. You're talking about the costs of these things. We scavenged materials. We used old bed frames. We took an entertainment system that we didn't need and took out all the interior partitions and used the outer side of it as a frame for a raised bed. We scavenged cinder blocks. We used straw bales to construct. Later, we just deconstructed it for the winter, like a compostable, essentially, raised bed. we just bought some landscaping fabric and put it down at the bottom to protect, like, so the root systems don't break through to the contaminated soil, and then we use that city compost that everybody's been talking about. We also, I mean, Judy mentioned container gardening. We grow things in milk crates, we grow things in pots, we grow things in old Tupperware tubs, buckets, on our porches. You know, we have things like climbing up the side. We use like netting for vines to twine up. We bring things in during the winter, so we have pepper plants that are now a few years old because they've been just living and producing continuously because we bring them in when it gets cold out. So there's a lot of ways to, even if you're living in an apartment, I mean, you can grow mini salad greens on your windowsill, an herb garden. Like, there's tons of different ways to make it work. So
That's it, time-wise, thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, Jan.
Thank you. Great job. Wow.